They first came from the grasslands, from a world many settled empires treated as a margin on the map. No marble capitals announced their rise. No ancient bureaucracy prepared the world for their arrival. At first glance, they seemed like scattered horsemen, divided by clan, hunger, and distance. Yet within a single lifetime, those horsemen would tear open the boundaries of Eurasia. Chinese dynasties, Persian cities, Russian principalities, Islamic scholars, European kings, all would be forced to look east and ask the same question. Who were these riders who moved faster than news, struck harder than armies, and appeared where geography said they should not be? The Mongols did not merely conquer land. They shattered the illusion that civilizations could live apart, protected by deserts, mountains, walls, and ignorance. Their empire burned cities, broke kingdoms, and carried terror across continents. But along the same roads came merchants, envoys, technologies, maps, and ideas. They destroyed worlds, and by destroying them, they connected them. To understand how this impossible empire emerged, we must return to the world before the hoofbeats. Before the Mongols, the medieval world was not small. It was vast, wealthy, and crowded with powers that believed they understood the limits of danger. In northern China, the Jin dynasty guarded its frontiers behind walls, garrisons, and centuries of imperial habit. Farther south, the Song commanded cities of astonishing wealth, where rivers carried grain, taxes, and soldiers through an ordered world. To the west, the Islamic heartlands stretched across Persia and Central Asia, rich with scholars, merchants, mosques, libraries, and caravan cities that sat like jewels along the trade routes. Beyond them, the Rus principalities fought among themselves in forests and riverlands. Farther still, Europe looked east with a mixture of ignorance, fear, and rumor. Between these worlds lay deserts, mountains, steppe, and time. A message could take months. An army could vanish before it arrived. Rulers made decisions with maps that were incomplete, reports that were old, and assumptions that felt safer than truth. Distance was not just geography. It was protection. It allowed empires to imagine that danger had borders. And on the open grasslands beyond the settled world's confidence, lived peoples many courts considered troublesome, useful, or forgettable. But the margin of the map was beginning to move. Soon, those distant riders would turn separation into illusion, and every frontier into a doorway for invasion itself. The question is not simply how the Mongols conquered. Conquest alone cannot explain what followed. How did a people born from tents, rival clans' winter hunger, and endless steppe feuds become the force that redrew the mental map of the medieval world? How did warriors raised in a land without great cities learn to defeat empires built on walls, taxes, scribes, and centuries of command? The answer was not one thing. It was leadership hardened by betrayal. It was mobility turned into strategy, fear turned into policy, and information turned into a weapon. It was an army that could travel farther than its enemies believed possible, strike before they were ready, and learn from every civilization it destroyed. But the Mongol story is not only a story of fire. Behind the massacres and ruined capitals came relay stations, protected routes, diplomatic missions, merchants, engineers, prisoners, and ideas moving across distances, once thought impossible. The same empire that brought terror to city gates also forced distant worlds to collide. That is the contradiction at the heart of this story. To understand it, we must begin not with the empire at its height, but with the broken world that shaped its maker. Temujin was not born into an empire. He was born into a world where survival depended on horses, weather, kinship, and the dangerous honesty of men who might abandon you by sunrise. His father, Yushuge, was a minor Mongol chieftain, powerful enough to make enemies, but not powerful enough to protect his family from them forever. When Temujin was still a boy, Yushuge was poisoned by rival Tatars. The death did more than take a father. It stripped the family of protection. Their clan cast them aside, leaving Temujin, his mother Holan, and his siblings to survive on roots, fish, wild plants, and whatever strength they could gather from the steppe. This was the first lesson the future conqueror learned. Blood did not guarantee loyalty. In the world of the steppe, alliances shifted like wind over grass. A friend today could be a rival tomorrow. A brother could become a threat. Captivity, humiliation, hunger, and violence were not interruptions to childhood. They were childhood itself. Temujin grew up watching trust fail and watching weakness invite destruction. But hardship did not make him merely cruel, it made him observant. He learned that a tribe held together only by ancestry could fracture under pressure. If he ever gained power, loyalty would have to be built differently. Not by blood alone. By reward, fear, discipline, and survival shared under one command. This wound would one day ride at the center of an empire. Temujin understood something the steppe aristocrats did not. A people chained to old blood feuds could never become an empire. For generations, power had flowed through lineage, clan prestige, and inherited privilege. Noble families expected command because their fathers had commanded before them. Warriors followed relatives before strategy. Victories settled old grudges, but they did not create lasting unity. The steppe could produce brave fighters by the thousands, but bravery alone only fed the cycle of revenge. Temujin began to break that cycle. He rewarded ability over ancestry. A captured enemy who proved loyal could rise higher than a noble who hesitated. Men who had once fought against him were folded into his command, not merely spared, but tested, promoted, and bound to his future. Aristocrats who clung to old privilege learned that birth would no longer protect incompetence. This was not generosity. It was design. Temujin reorganized warriors into units that cut across clan identity, forcing men to depend on comrades who were not their kin. Loyalty shifted upward, away from bloodline and toward command. Discipline became survival. Obedience became advancement. Betrayal became fatal. In doing this, he did more than build an army. He created a new political order on the steppe, one where personal loyalty, shared plunder, and military discipline could hold together what ancestry never could. The old world of tribal rivalry was being dismantled from within, and in its place, Temujin was forging something far more dangerous, a nation built for war. Temujin's victory over the steppe did not end with a single battle. It ended with an assembly. On the open grasslands, the surviving tribes gathered in a Kurultai, the great council where power was recognized before heaven and men. There, the boy who had once been abandoned to hunger was raised above the clans that had tried to crush him. Temujin became Genghis Khan. The title did not make him divine. It made his revolution official. For the first time, the Mongol tribes were no longer only a collection of rival lineages, temporary alliances, and inherited grudges. They were being fused into one political body, bound by law, plunder, discipline, and fear of punishment. Old enemies stood under the same command. Former captives now served beside men of noble birth. The steppe, which had spent generations consuming itself, had been redirected into a single will. This was the earthquake the settled world did not yet understand. Beyond, the grasslands stood empires with walls, treasuries, scribes, armies, and ancient confidence. They looked at the nomads and saw disorder. But beneath the felt tents and horse herds, something new had formed, a command structure that could move faster than states, punish betrayal more ruthlessly than kings, and reward obedience with the wealth of conquered worlds. The violence that once turned inward now had no reason to remain there. Its direction would decide the fate of cities that had never heard his name, or feared it. Genghis Khan had united the steppe, but unity created a dangerous question. If the Mongols were no longer fighting each other, then who would they fight next? The Mongol army was described as a horde. The word made them sound chaotic, like a flood of horsemen surviving on fury alone. But that mistake was one reason so many armies failed against them. Behind the speed was a system. Mongol forces were organized by tens, hundreds, thousands, and tumens of 10,000. Commanders knew who answered to whom. Orders could move quickly. Units could split apart, ride for days across different routes, then reunite at a chosen place, as if pulled together by invisible thread. Every warrior was a mounted archer, but he was more than a rider with a bow. He carried weapons for distance and close combat. He traveled with spare horses, changing mounts to preserve strength and cover distances that shocked slower armies. What looked like disorder was coordination moving faster than the enemy could understand. Discipline was severe. A man who abandoned his unit endangered more than himself. A commander who hesitated could lose not only a battle, but the trust that held the machine together. Yet within that discipline, Mongol generals had room to think. They could scout, adapt, retreat, encircle, and exploit opportunities without waiting for every command from above. This was the secret architecture of conquest. The Mongols did not win because they were wild. They won because they turned mobility into planning, and planning into shock. Before their enemies saw an army, They felt the weather changing, and soon that storm would learn to conquer not only battlefields, but minds. The Mongols understood that an army did not have to arrive before a city began to fall. Long before their horsemen appeared on the horizon, information moved ahead of them. Scouts rode across rivers, deserts, and mountain passes, measuring roads, wells, grazing land, bridges, walls, and weaknesses. Merchants carried rumors from market to market. Defectors brought names, rivalries, and secrets from inside enemy courts. Prisoners were questioned, guides were forced into service, and every fragment of knowledge became part of the campaign. This was not blind invasion. It was reconnaissance sharpened into strategy. And beside information came fear. Survivors from one shattered city reached the next with stories of speed, siege engines, massacres, and impossible appearances. Some tales grew in the telling, but the Mongols did not need to correct them. Terror was useful. A city that believed resistance meant annihilation might surrender before the first arrow flew. A ruler who trusted walls might suddenly doubt them. An army that heard too much too soon might march defeated in its own mind. The Mongols used reputation like another column of cavalry. Smoke signals, relay riders, and disciplined communication allowed distant units to coordinate. But rumor did something even faster. It crossed borders without orders. It entered councils, temples, barracks, and marketplaces. It made enemies argue before battle, hesitate before decisions, and imagine defeat before contact. The empire moved on horses, but it conquered first through the mind. Before the gate was struck, certainty had already begun to crack. And once fear opened the first breach, Mongol siegecraft would widen it. Speed could win battles on the steppe. It could scatter armies, overrun camps, and turn retreat into slaughter. But the settled world presented a different problem. Cities did not run. Against Shisha and the Jin, the Mongols met walls, towers, moats, gates, granaries, and populations large enough to absorb terror without immediately collapsing. Here, the old skills of the steppe were not enough. A horse archer could dominate open ground, but he could not ride through stone. A Tumen could cross a desert with terrifying speed, but speed alone could not force a fortified capital to open its gates. So the Mongols did what made them more dangerous than mere raiders. They learned. Chinese engineers, captured specialists, defectors, and craftsmen were drawn into their war machine. Siege towers, catapults, rams, mines, and later gunpowder weapons became extensions of Mongol mobility. They studied defenses, cut supply lines, surrounded cities, diverted rivers, and waited when waiting served the campaign. Patience, once foreign to raiding warfare, became another weapon. This transformation mattered more than any single victory. The Mongols were discovering that civilization could not be conquered only by defeating soldiers. It had to be starved, frightened, negotiated with, dismantled, and used. Each city they attacked taught them something. Each engineer they captured made the next wall more vulnerable. Each resistance hardened their method. The steppe army was becoming something new, a force that could destroy armies in motion and cities behind stone. And once the Mongols learned to break walls, the richest civilizations of Eurasia were no longer protected by the things they trusted most, their ancient confidence and stone itself. By the time the Mongols turned toward Central Asia, Khwarazm was not a weak kingdom waiting to collapse. It was one of the great powers of the Islamic world, stretching across Persia, Transoxiana, and the caravan cities that linked east and west. Its markets glittered with silk, silver, spices, books, and slaves. Its rulers commanded armies, fortresses, tax collectors, and cities whose names carried the weight of learning and wealth. At its center stood Shah Muhammad II, a ruler ambitious enough to challenge rivals, but insecure enough to fear shadows inside his own empire. To him, the Mongols were dangerous, but still distant. Steppe warriors had raided before. Nomads had come and gone. The cities endured. Genghis Khan did not first approach Khwarazm as an invader. He sent merchants and envoys, seeking trade and recognition. For a moment, two worlds might have met through negotiation, the mobile empire of the steppe and the urban empire of Islam. But at Otrar, a Mongol trade caravan was seized. Its merchants were accused of spying. Then, when Genghis sent envoys demanding justice, the insult deepened. One envoy was reportedly killed, others humiliated and sent back. For the Mongols, this was not merely a diplomatic failure. It was an assault on the authority of the Khan himself. Shah Muhammad had misread the steppe. He saw distance, deserts, and fortified cities, he saw a nomadic enemy that could be contained. What he did not see was a military system already hardened by China, guided by intelligence, and commanded by a ruler who treated betrayal as a wound that must be answered completely. The storm that followed would not be a raid. It would be vengeance organized as strategy. And one insult, at the edge of an empire, would soon reorder the fate of continents forever. When the Mongol invasion began, Shah Muhammad expected the war to follow familiar lines. Armies would approach through known roads. Fortresses would delay them. Deserts would exhaust them. Great cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench would anchor resistance behind walls, rivers, and distance. Genghis Khan broke that expectation before the first major battle. He did not send one army straight into Khwarazm. He divided his forces, sending columns across different routes, through deserts, around defenses, and toward targets the Shah believed were protected by geography itself. One force threatened the frontier. Another moved through the Kizilkum Desert, appearing near Bukhara from a direction that should have been impossible. Others advanced towards Samarkand, the imperial prize, while commanders hunted the Shah across his own territory. The invasion was not a hammer blow. It was a net. Each Mongol column had a purpose. Some fixed enemy forces in place. Some spread panic. Some cut roads and communications. Others bypassed strongpoints to strike the political and economic heart of the empire. Khwarazm's size, which should have been its strength, became a weakness. Messages arrived too late. Governors defended themselves instead of the whole. The Shah, uncertain where the main blow would fall, could not concentrate his armies. The Mongols had turned the map into a weapon. They understood that an empire was not only cities and soldiers, it was roads, rivers, messengers, trust, and the belief that the ruler still controlled events. By attacking from several directions, they shattered that belief. Every rumor of a new Mongol column made the next city feel isolated. Every delayed order made commanders doubt the center. Khwarazm was being defeated before its armies could gather. The walls still stood. The bazaars still breathed. The mosques still called the faithful to prayer. But the empire's nervous system had already been cut. Now the horsemen were at the gates, and the warnings carried by fear were about to become reality. Bukhara fell first into the legend of Mongol terror. The city had known merchants, scholars, mosques, and libraries. It had lived by trade, law, and faith. But when the Mongols entered, its wealth could not protect it. Genghis Khan gathered the people and made the conquest speak. The message was simple. Resistance had consequences, and those consequences would travel farther than any army. Samarkand, greater and stronger, faced the same machinery. Its walls were high, its garrison large, its reputation immense. Yet reputation could not repair broken command. The Mongols surrounded, pressured, divided, and exploited fear inside the city. Some defenders fought. Others surrendered. Useful craftsmen and specialists were separated from the doomed. Soldiers, officials, and many civilians faced the punishment chosen to echo beyond the battlefield. This was not random violence. It was terror organized into policy. The Mongols understood that every city did not have to be conquered the same way, if one city could teach 10 others what defiance might cost. Refugees became unwilling messengers. Survivors carried images of broken gates, emptied streets, and families torn apart. Before Mongol armies reached the next walls, the story had already arrived. Yet there was a colder logic beneath the horror. Those who surrendered early might be spared. Engineers, artisans, scribes, and physicians could be preserved and moved into Mongol service. Mercy existed, but it was conditional. Survival depended less on innocence than usefulness and obedience. Here the empire revealed one of its darkest strengths. It could combine massacre and administration, fear and recruitment, annihilation and absorption. Khwarazm did not merely lose cities. It lost the belief that cities could save it. And as Bukhara and Samarkand became warnings carved into memory, Mongol riders looked beyond the ruins toward lands that had never imagined this storm could reach them. Khwarazm was broken, but the Mongol advance did not stop at the ruins. Two of Genghis Khan's greatest commanders, Subutai and Jebe, rode west with a force that was too small to conquer the world, but large enough to measure it. Their mission was not simply pursuit. It was reconnaissance by fire, a moving campaign designed to learn roads, rivers, peoples, armies, and weaknesses beyond the Islamic frontier. They crossed Persia's shattered edges, moved through the Caucasus, and fought kingdoms whose rulers barely understood who had entered their world. Georgian armies were defeated, mountain passes were tested, local alliances were studied, broken, or bypassed. Every battle gave information, every prisoner gave names, every road revealed another road beyond it. This was how the Mongols thought about distance. To other powers, the unknown was a barrier. To Subutai, it was a problem to be mapped. The farther he rode, the more the Western world became visible. The steppe north of the Black Sea, the Cuman Nomads, the divided Rus principalities, and beyond them, the shadowy kingdoms of Europe. This was not yet the Great Invasion. It was something colder and more patient. The Mongols were testing the edges of a continent. They were learning how fast armies could move there, which peoples hated each other, which rulers could be baited, and which coalitions might collapse under pressure. The raid was violent, but its greatest prize was knowledge. In Mongol hands, knowledge was never passive. It became the beginning of conquest. For the first time, Europe was entering Mongol strategy not as rumor, but as geography. And once a land appeared clearly on a Mongol map, it rarely remained untouched for long. The Cumans were the first to understand that the riders from the east were not ordinary raiders. Driven from the steppe, they turned to the Rus princes for help, warning that if the Mongols were not stopped now, the next lands to burn would be theirs. The appeal worked, but only halfway. Rus princes gathered their forces, joined by Cuman allies, yet unity existed more in fear than command. These were proud rulers, used to guarding their own cities, jealous of one another's prestige, and reluctant to submit to a single plan. Against another enemy, courage in numbers might have been enough. Against Subutai and Jebe, division was already a wound. The Mongols did not rush to close it. Instead, they withdrew. For days, the Rus and Cuman forces pursued them across the open steppe. To the coalition, the retreat seemed like proof that the invaders were frightened. Confidence grew with every mile. The enemy was running. Victory appeared to be moving just ahead, always close enough to chase, never close enough to strike. But this was the old Mongol art at work. Retreat was not surrender. It was a weapon. Each day of pursuit stretched the coalition farther from supplies, farther from caution, and farther from any ground its commanders understood. The faster elements surged ahead. Others fell behind. Coordination loosened. Pride slowly replaced patience. Subutai was not fleeing from battle. He was choosing the place where battle would happen. Near the Kalka River, the trap finally began to close. The army that believed it was hunting the Mongols had been pulled across the steppe like a blade drawn from its sheath. And now, far from safety, the hunters were about to discover they had become the waiting prey. At the Kalka River, the Mongol retreat ended. The Rus and Cuman forces, stretched by days of pursuit, no longer arrived as one army. They came in pieces, tired, confident, separated, and eager to finish what they believed was a chase. That was exactly what Subutai and Jebe had been waiting for. Their horse archers struck the forward elements first, showering them with arrows, then slipping away before counterattacks could form. Units that tried to press forward found themselves isolated. Those behind could not easily support them. What had looked like a coalition became a series of disconnected targets. The feigned retreat had done its work. It had turned impatience into vulnerability. Then came the encirclement. Mongol riders swept around the broken formations, attacking flanks, cutting escape routes, and driving panic through men who had expected victory. Commanders struggled to impose order on forces that had never truly been unified. The battlefield became a lesson written in dust and blood. Courage without coordination could be destroyed by discipline. The defeat was devastating. Rus princes were killed or captured. Warriors who had ridden out believing they were defending the steppe returned as corpses, prisoners, or rumors. The Mongols did not remain to conquer the Rus lands then. They withdrew eastward, carrying with them something more valuable than plunder. They carried knowledge. They had tested the armies beyond the Black Sea. They had studied the terrain, the alliances, the pride, and the fractures. Europe had not yet faced the full Mongol invasion, but it had been measured. Kalka was not the storm itself. It was the first thunder, and the tragedy was that many who heard it did not understand what was coming until it was far too late. Genghis Khan was dead, but the empire did not die with him. That was the first terrifying proof of what he had built. Many conquerors leave behind followers, sons, and legends. Genghis left behind something more durable, a system. Armies still obeyed, messengers still rode. Commanders still planned across distances that would have paralyzed older states. The steppe had not returned to its old feuds. It had become an imperial machine. Under Genghis Khan, that machine kept expanding. The new ruler inherited more than land. He inherited ambition, discipline, and unfinished directions of conquest. China still demanded attention. Persia had been broken but not fully settled. And to the west lay the lands Subutai, and Geb had already tested years earlier. The Rus principalities, the Cuman steppe, Hungary, Poland, and the vulnerable edge of Europe. This time, the ride west would not be a reconnaissance raid. It would be a coordinated imperial campaign. Batu, grandson of Genghis Khan, would lead the western armies. But beside him stood Subutai, the strategist who had already seen the roads, rivers, rivalries, and weaknesses of the frontier. The knowledge gathered at Kalka had not been forgotten. It had been stored, sharpened, and prepared for use. The haunting truth was now clear. Genghis Khan had created a power that no longer needed his living hand. The man who forged the storm was gone, but the storm had learned how to move by itself, and its next path led into the frozen gates of the Rus. The Mongols came into the Rus lands with a lesson their enemies had not imagined. Winter could serve the invader. Frozen rivers became roads. Marshes hardened beneath hooves. Routes that might have slowed an army in spring now carried columns of horsemen deep into territory the defenders believed protected by season and distance. The cold did not stop the Mongols. It widened their battlefield. The Rus principalities faced them divided. Each city guarded its own walls. Each prince measured danger through local rivalries, and no single command could turn scattered courage into common defense. Against another enemy, the forests and rivers might have bought time. Against Batu and Subutai, delay became impossible. Appeals for aid brought little salvation. The city resisted, and resistance was answered with annihilation. From there, the shadow moved onward, Vladimir, Suzdal, towns and strongholds falling in sequence, each ruin sending terror ahead to the next. The Mongols did not need to conquer every road if fear traveled faster than their scouts. Years of Rus rivalry now became a strategic disaster. One city's fall did not unite the rest quickly. Instead, it deepened panic. Refugees carried stories of burning gates, broken churches, and horsemen appearing through snow like judgment. Then came Kiev, ancient and weakened. Its fall was more than a military defeat. It was a symbolic wound across the Rus world. By the time the western roads opened, Europe was not watching a border raid. It was watching a civilization being dismantled in winter. Hungary was the strongest barrier left in the Mongols' western path. King Belaliveth gathered his army near the Sajo River, placing his camp behind wagons and trusting the river crossings to slow the enemy. To many in the Hungarian host, the position seemed defensible. The bridge could be guarded. The camp could be fortified. The Mongols, after so many victories, might finally be forced into a direct assault. But Subutai did not intend to fight only where Bela was looking. During the night, Mongol forces moved toward the bridge, while other units searched for crossings upstream and downstream. Siege engines hammered the defenders with stones and fire, not against city walls, but on an open battlefield. The river, meant to protect the Hungarians, became a screen behind which the Mongols arranged pressure from several directions. At dawn, the trap unfolded. One Mongol force attacked the bridge. Others crossed elsewhere, appearing where they were not expected. The Hungarian camp, crowded and confused, turned from refuge into prison. Men struggled to form lines inside the wagon defenses. Panic spread faster than command. When gaps opened, many fled through them, only to be hunted down across the plain. Mohi was not a wild charge. It was controlled panic, engineered by timing, movement, and pressure. Europe had nearly broken there. Hungary lay devastated, its king fleeing, its defenses shattered. And then, just when the road west seemed open, the Mongols began to withdraw. The reason was not victory in Europe. It was a death, far away in the distant heart of empire itself. The Mongols did not leave Europe because they had been defeated. That is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of the Western campaign. Hungary was shattered. Poland had been struck. The Rus lands had been broken into submission. Roads into Austria, the German lands, and beyond lay exposed. No grand European army had thrown the invaders back. No fortress line had stopped them. The storm had not spent itself. Then came news from the east. Genghis Khan was dead. In the Mongol world, succession was not a private court matter. It was an imperial crisis. Princes of the blood were expected to return, gather, argue, and decide who would inherit supreme power. For commanders like Batu, the Western campaign could not be separated from politics at the center of the empire. The fate of Europe was suddenly tied to a throne thousands of miles away. So the armies turned back. To the kingdoms they left behind, the withdrawal must have felt like deliverance. But it was not proof that Europe had mastered Mongol warfare. It was proof of something stranger. History can pivot on decisions made far beyond the battlefield. A continent had survived, not through a single heroic victory, but through the demands of Mongol succession. Yet, the retreat did not erase what had happened. The riders had shown Europe its vulnerability. And although the armies withdrew, the roads they opened would not close again. The Mongol armies withdrew from Europe, but the world they had torn open did not return to silence. Across Eurasia, conquest began to harden into administration. Roads were guarded. Relay stations carried messages at astonishing speed. Passports and official tablets gave merchants, envoys, and messengers protection under Mongol authority. Bandits who had once preyed on caravans now faced an empire that understood the value of movement. This was the strange peace later remembered as the Pax Mongolica. It was not peace born from mercy. It rested on fear, punishment, and the memory of cities that had resisted and vanished. Yet under that shadow, trade began to move with a reach few earlier rulers could have imagined. Silk, silver, horses, spices, manuscripts, engineers, physicians, monks, diplomats, and rumors crossed distances that had once divided civilizations. The same empire that burned Bukhara helped a merchant travel from the Black Sea toward China. The same power that shattered kingdoms made roads safer for ambassadors and craftsmen. Destruction had cleared paths. Terror had imposed order. Conquest had created corridors. This is the paradox of the Mongol Empire. It did not connect the world gently. It connected it by force. But once the routes were open, people, goods, and ideas moved through them with consequences. No Khan could fully control. The battlefield was no longer the only place history was changing. Now, along the roads built by ruin, knowledge itself began to travel faster. And with it, the boundaries of the known world began shifting. Along these routes, movement became memory. A merchant leaving one end of Eurasia could now hear stories from the other. A monk could cross lands once known only through rumor. An envoy could return with descriptions of courts, armies, customs, and roads that widened the imagination of kings. The Mongols did not invent every idea that traveled through their empire, but they accelerated the contact between worlds that had lived too long behind distance. Gunpowder technologies moved westward in forms that would slowly transform siege warfare and battlefield power. Paper and printing traditions carried knowledge more cheaply and more widely. Astronomers compared observations. Physicians encountered unfamiliar treatments. Mapmakers received reports that made the world seem larger, stranger, and more connected than before. Some exchanges were deliberate. The Mongols moved engineers, scribes, doctors, and craftsmen where they were useful. Others were unintended. A caravan might carry silk in one direction, mathematical knowledge in another, and rumors everywhere in between. Diplomats returned to Europe with accounts of Asia that challenged inherited ignorance. Muslim, Chinese, Persian, and European worlds began seeing one another, not as myths beyond the horizon, but as political realities. This did not create a peaceful global age. The roads still carried fear, but contact has consequences. Civilizations begin learning each other's roots, weapons, wealth, and weaknesses. History changes speed. The Mongols had broken the old barriers with violence, but through the cracks came something no army could fully command: the movement of knowledge itself across the known world. Connection brought movement, but movement did not carry only wealth. The roads of the Mongol world could bear silk, silver, spices, and ambassadors. They could carry monks toward distant courts and merchants toward markets, once hidden by geography. But those same roads could also carry prisoners, displaced families, rumors of massacre and diseases that moved with caravans, armies, and ships. The world had become more connected. It had also become more vulnerable. No frontier could fully seal itself from consequences born thousands of miles away. A crisis in one region could echo into another. Panic could travel beside trade. Human suffering could be redistributed across routes that looked, on a map, like lines of progress. For many, Mongol connection meant opportunity. For others, it meant enslavement, forced migration, ruined cities, and memories that would not heal for generations. This is the truth the story cannot soften. The Mongols helped open Eurasia, but they did not open it gently. Their roads carried blessings and curses together, and the world they connected would never again be innocent of distance, fear, or contact. At its greatest extent, the Mongol Empire seemed too large to fail. From China to the Black Sea, from Persia to the Siberian forests, its roads tied continents together under the authority of one imperial house. But distance does not remain obedient forever. After the age of expansion, the empire began to divide into great khanates. In China, the Yuan dynasty ruled over a settled civilization older and larger than the steppe itself. In Persia, the Ilkhanate entered the world of Islamic politics and administration. Across Central Asia, the Chagatai Khanate guarded the old heartlands of the conquest. On the western steppe, the Golden Horde dominated the Rus and watched Europe from afar. Each Khanate carried the Mongol name. Each faced different peoples, religions, economies, and ambitions. The empire had broken the world open, but ruling that open world required more than cavalry, terror, and loyalty to a distant memory. Succession disputes deepened. Rival courts hardened. Local interests grew stronger than universal command. Conquest had created a problem conquest could not solve. The Mongols had mastered movement across continents. What they could not master forever was unity across them. The dream of one empire was becoming four separate futures, irreversibly. In the end, the Mongol Empire did what all empires do. It changed, divided, and faded from the shape its founder had imagined. The hoofbeats that once terrified Eurasia grew quieter. Cities that had burned were rebuilt. Markets reopened. Caravan bells returned to roads where armies had once passed. New rulers claimed old capitals. New faiths, languages, and customs reshaped the khanates from within. But the world itself did not close again. After the Mongols, distance no longer meant what it had meant before. Europe knew Asia was not a rumor. China, Persia, the steppe, Russia, and the Islamic world had been forced into contact by conquest, diplomacy, trade, and fear. Maps widened. Envoys traveled farther. Merchants imagined longer routes. States learned that events beyond the horizon could one day arrive at their gates. This was the final consequence of the empire that should not have existed. It broke kingdoms. It slaughtered cities. It carried knowledge, disease, wealth, and terror across the same roads. History had expanded, but not peacefully. The Mongols opened the world through catastrophe. And when their empire fell apart, the silence they left behind was not emptiness. It was a larger world, still echoing around us.